Welcome to the Veritas Forum, engaging university students and faculty in discussions about life's hardest questions and the relevance of Jesus Christ to all of life.
Thanks, guys. I'd like to start by thanking the Williams Secular Community and the Williams Christian Fellowship for the invitation to have Professor Garrity and I come here. I'd like to thank Professor Garrity, Tom Garrity, for being my partner in crime and a really good friend of mine. And actually to Steve Platts, who's actually going to be sitting between the both of us. That's really good. So I just want to be really clear as to what I'm going to be doing tonight and what I'm not going to be doing. So I'm not going to be arguing against atheism. Right? That's not my punchline, it's not my vision. I'm not going to be sharing the wonders of the Christian faith. Right? There's tons of books out there, lots of brilliant people, far more brilliant than I am, who've actually argued those points. What I really want to do today is to offer you just a personal viewpoint as to how I think. You know, I'm a mathematician, I love math. And I also love to serve God. So how does this thing fit together? And the great thing is Professor Garrity is also a mathematician who loves math. So how is it that two people sort of have the same background, DNA, have different views? So that's one thing So the best place, I think, for me to start is to look at something called the Renaissance era. Many of you know about this era. And the Renaissance era is a time of art, music, math, literature, and it turns out that it seamlessly actually integrates all these things. For example, faith, reason, science, interconnected in great ways. If you look at the work of Da Vinci, you see that when he wears his hat to be a mathematician or to be an engineer or wears his hat to be a scientist, he just blurs the lines. He doesn't actually partition his world into these pieces, but actually brings them together. And I think this kind of an idea, this Renaissance era, is something that should be embodied in the Williams community. I think this is sort of the goal of the liberal arts education, is to break down the boundaries and to see the connections between these things. So the Enlightenment is the era that followed after the Renaissance, around the 1750s, right? Which is about 250 years ago. In the Enlightenment era, this was a time where reason was advocated as the primary source of authority. For example, ideas must be tested, ideas must be measured, evaluated, quantified, and not simply accepted by faith. Now, I am a huge fan of the Enlightenment era. Why? Because it's given the world great things, and it's given me something I really love. It's given me a job. We have, because of this, better transportation, better medicine, and if you've ever had Grader's ice cream, the ice cream's phenomenal. All the chocolate chunks actually are soft in the ice cream. So all of this actually comes from the Enlightenment, this new way of thinking about pushing technology and ideas. Now, the problem is, I think, this age of reason, this Enlightenment age of reason has been taken to an extreme. And because of this, we've ended up with dualism. And I just want to explain to you what I mean by dualism, where things that were once together in the Renaissance have actually been torn apart into pieces. So the best way, and since this is a math talk after all, the best way to talk about dualism is to show you this, this little equation, which I'm absolutely in love with. This is the Gauss-Bonnet theorem, if you know what this is. It is by far my favorite theorem, my favorite result in mathematics. And what it says simply is, on the left side, the nerdier ones can follow along, the integral, which means you're adding up the curviness of your surface. If you add up the curvature at every point of the surface, it's only dependent on sort of the underlying shape of the surface itself. Right? It's basically a visual result. It's basically an idea about visualization embodied in a mathematical formula. Now, when most of you see this, you probably identify with Stephen Colbert when he says the words, the equations, or the devil sentences. So there's this dualism. You have this beautiful formula which actually encapsulates math visually, and yet we're sort of sickened by it for some of us. And so let me actually push it a little bit more to explain to you in the math world when I'm talking about this dualism. So here we have John Littlewood. He was a mathematician at the turn of the last century. He has a number of theories, and he wrote these words, which I adore. And here's what he says. He says, a heavy warning used to be given that pictures are not rigorous. This has never had its bluff called, and has permanently frightened its victims. What does that mean? What he's saying is that, you know what, if you want to do math, you can actually talk about equations and algebra and symbols all you want, but don't you dare bring pictures into the game. You can use pictures to have examples of things, but don't you use that to prove things. Right? So this partition, again, has happened from the time of the Renaissance, that you're supposed to tear things apart, that math has to be done in some abstract setting. And let me show you this picture right here. These are 4 examples of 4-dimensional polytopes. Right? And I've just drawn these pictures in 3D as a way of pushing it down. And it turns out that all 4 of these guys are the same. Now, what is the proof that all 4 of these polytopes are the same? 4 of these 4-dimensional objects. The answer is, this is the proof. There is nothing else. You just look at it. Now, maybe you might not be able to see it, but that just means you're weak. So some of us are gifted in terms of understanding equations. You can look at the Pythagorean theorem and immediately see those answers. Some of us are gifted visually, right? And the goal is in math, you want to bring these ideas together. So that's just a taste of what I mean in terms of this dualism. But let me tell you what this dualism has done, not just in the math world, but if you push it into community. So here's a list of things that were together. We have history and facts, faith and reason, religion and politics, and supernatural and natural. Let me just pause and explain to you what I mean by religion and politics being together, right? Religion to me are the answers to the big questions. Like, who are we? Why are we here? What is the goal of mankind? Are we supposed to achieve a goal? That's the big questions. Politics is how do we answer little problems or the problems that are immediate to us. What should we do about the poor? What should we do about immigrants? How does the borders in the world look like? What should we do about healthcare? Now, of course, the big questions, the big answers, are directly going to impact the answers to the small things. So religion and politics actually should go hand in hand. The way we think about big issues and the issues of immediate day-to-day life fit together. Now, what's happened today is because of this dualism, because of pushing the Enlightenment to an extreme, we don't have one or the other. It's actually turned out that it's one versus the other. Right? It's either you have to have either religion or you have to have politics. You must either be in the natural realm or you must be in the supernatural realm. The world has been partitioned into pieces. Now, the Enlightenment mindset claims that education is the way to solve all the problems. If you push it to the extreme, you get to something like this. You get to somehow a Star Trek mindset where we're all somehow socially evolving towards a better day where knowledge and hard work will bring us to utopia. I believe this is a myth of progress. This idealism neither explains nor eradicates the evils of the 20th century. Let me explain to you what I mean by that. Today, we have more knowledge today than ever before in terms of understanding our world, our universe, and yet we still have so much pain. We still have so much hopelessness and injustice. And we still struggle as individuals to find love, acceptance, meaning, and purpose. How is this possible if we're learning more and more stuff, if we're understanding more and more about the world? I think that ideas and knowledge and science are wonderful. I'm a scientist. I love it. But I think that they're tools of understanding the world, and they're not the solutions to the world themselves. Furthermore, I think that we as individuals are more complicated than just this natural dimension that you see. There's more to us than there's just one side. You know, by accepting the Enlightenment as the main view of thinking about it, I think we ignore the cries of the postmodern today, and we ignore the enormous explosion of faith that's happening around the world. Now, you might not be able to see this explosion of faith in the Western Hemisphere, especially in Europe and North America. But in Africa, in South America, at least from the Christian faith that I know, it has gone from 5% to almost 50%. It's ridiculous in the world of enlightenment and knowledge today. How is this possible? Religion, it turns out, to the world still matters. Now, some might say, you know what? It's only mattering because they need more knowledge. You know, if we have this concept of what our mind really does, what genetics really does, what the chemical process really does, we'll be able to explain that part of religion away. Well, that reminds me of what Stephen Hawking, in his recent book, The Grand Design, talked about when he's trying to explain the difference between classical mechanics and quantum mechanics. You know, when this quantum mechanical idea came about, people didn't understand it at all from the Newtonian viewpoint. And here's what he writes. He writes, when a model is found lacking, a common reaction is to say that experiment was wrong. If that doesn't prove to be the case, people still often don't abandon the model, but instead attempt to save it through modifications. In other words, if it doesn't make sense why religion is still around and still thriving so much, we try to patch it on with more knowledge. I think just taking that model of enlightenment and trying to fix it isn't enough. A new model is needed. A new model that doesn't throw away enlightenment. I love the enlightenment, but actually encompasses it and folds it. You see, when you look at quantum mechanics, it doesn't throw away classical mechanics. It takes it, it honors it, and it pushes it to the next level because of it. And I think this model is needed. Not just ideas alone, but more of supernatural is needed along with the natural. So, for the next few minutes, I just want to close with one thing. Why am I, out of all the different ways that I'm arguing for the sake of faith, why did I pick the Christian faith? You know, should we just be supernatural in some generic realm? And I want to tell you as a mathematician, as somebody who loves logic, I want to tell you 3 reasons why I think it's absolutely sexy. First, I think that this ultimate truth is not given in the Christian faith in an abstract setting. It is grounded in history. You see, God does not somehow give us rules and laws and golden tablets and leave us alone. The Bible is not just these set of rules and laws, but it's a record of the Lord of the universe coming down and interacting with us in history. He's called Emmanuel, which means God with us. This is why I find it so attractive. The climax of God's interaction with us was the death and the resurrection of Jesus, and I believe it is a historical event. That is actually what convinces me to actually like the Christian faith. It is appealing to me because I can measure it from a historical setting. But it is unique, this event. It is unrepeatable, this event. So the tools we have of science don't work, but something else is needed to understand it. Secondly, I'm also attracted to how this absolute truth is presented, how it's presented. You see, it is not a blind allegiance to a God who asks and demands because he has absolute power. The Lord of the universe does not ask you to bend your knee, for he has absolute power. The Christian faith says that the Lord of the universe bends his knee on the cross and gives up his absolute power for us. That is attractive to me. And third, and finally, I want to close with this. I believe that the Christian faith, to me, out of looking at the other faiths, is the only viewpoint that truly offers us a restorative answer to this world. You see, the Eastern faiths give us a sense of acceptance. They say, in the world, you will have good and bad. You might have equality in one might be dominant over the other one, but we have to live with both of these things, the good and the bad. The Western faith offers us escapism. They say, you know what? The world is going to hell, and we must literally get the hell out of here. That's what it's saying in some sense. We must push this world away, this world of flesh. It is a Platonic dualistic thinking, again, that says the spirit is somehow greater than the flesh, that all that matters is saving enough people in so the world's going to burn so we can just float in heaven. See, this is the Western dualistic philosophy. And this idea of escapism, we see this in Bertrand Russell, who's this amazingly brilliant mathematician and philosopher. And he writes the following thing about mathematics. He writes, remote from human passions, remote even from the pitiful facts of nature, the generations have gradually created an ordered cosmos where pure thought can dwell as it is a natural home, and where one, at least, of our nobler impulses can escape from the dreary exile of the actual world. Escapism through math, and I think math is fantastic, but the goal isn't to ascend into the spiritual realm of pure math. What the Christian faith offers us, I think, is restoration. See, this resurrection life that Jesus promises to me is not compensation for life on this earth. It's not a good token you get for doing well, but it's the restoration of life. It is the answer that says God will actually set this world right one day. This is why I'm excited about it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I'm going to start because for academic honest reasons, say something that repeat something how I started present tense. I'm not taking that as a sign.
Stand back.
I was getting a small present. Small present. Hello. This is part of my 15 minutes. I was giving a small presentation to a small group of students here on why I hate astrologers but respect fundamentalists. And the reason why I'm saying that is because the very first part of what I'm saying is repeating that. And it started with a story about Isaac Rabi. Rabi was a major physicist of the 20th century. He was, I think, born in Eastern Europe, but immigrated when he was a very, very small child, grew up in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, in Brooklyn, as an Orthodox Jew. Now, near the end of his life, in the 70s or 80s, he was famous enough that people were going to write his biographies. And there's two people interviewing him. And they asked him what was his religion. He immediately replied, "I'm an Orthodox Jew." His biographers looked at him and went, "Well, what do you mean? You don't follow any of the practices? You don't follow any of the traditions? You're not Orthodox?" No. The church I don't go to is an Orthodox synagogue. The church I don't go to is a Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. And all religion is filtered for me through that. And I'll explain what that means in a minute. But first, let's go back to that story. It's a false memory. I think I did present that to students, but then before this tonight, I went to the biography I read. I remembered the paragraph where I read it. There was no such paragraph. My memory was false. I would have banked money on it. True statements are phenomenally tricky. Okay, I said I was raised as a Lutheran Missouri Synod. What does that mean? I realize in this audience there's people all over the map religiously. There are people here whose the most important thing in your life is your relationship with Jesus Christ. There's people here, and I've had conversations with I think a few of you, who says, "I know there's a difference in Christians, I'm not exactly sure what it is." That's a wide range of difference. Now, Lutheran Missouri Synod is Lutheran, coming from Martin Luther, who started the Reformation. He's certainly the one who emphasized that what matters is faith, primarily faith in Jesus Christ. He took Paul's epistles seriously. That's the tradition I come from. Missouri Synod, what does that mean? Well, the Lutheran Church in America is split up in these various groups, the synods. What they are is, I think historically, where there were ethnic groups. There was, the Swedish Lutherans. There was the Finnish Lutherans, mainly Northern Europeans. Missouri Synod were the German Lutherans. I think they still had church services in Germany until World War I, when that became less than fashionable. Missouri Synod is different than the other synods, though. And here's why. Again, it's the way I see the religious world. First of all, like with most Lutherans, unlike almost all other Protestants, they really believe communion counts. It's not a symbol. It's the body and blood of Christ. That's why on occasion there's even talk about having common communion with Catholics. It's why I am aghast that you could have a church service and have non-believers take communion. If it's a symbol, who cares? Where I was raised, it's the body and blood of Christ. Missouri Synod is also weird, though. It believes in the inerrancy of the Bible. Every word in the Bible has to be true. Certainly was why I was raised. Now, Lutherans, as being linked to Catholics, as being not that far from Catholics, believe in original sin. They believe that we are born evil. They believe that we inherit that first sin from Adam and Eve. Here's why you should believe in every word of the Bible. How dare you use petty human reason when your tendency is to go being evil, when there's actually an actual force in the world that's evil, Satan. You're going to allow your petty reason to decide what in the Bible you're going to believe and not believe? I don't think so. No, I don't believe any of that. But I respect it. It's intellectually rigorous, and it's honest. Now, I've learned over the years, especially at Williams, faculty talk. I mean, I see Stuart Crampton there. We've had seminars on this kind of stuff. And then I hear various people very good, and it took me a long time to tease out what was going on. I realized when people talk about religion, they're usually coming from their own personal religious experience, and they assume that's what everyone is. I remember last year at the Veritas Forum, when the person who was coming from MIT, defending the Christian standpoint, said, oh, I believe in evolution. I realized there are many Christians who believe in evolution. But still, in my heart of hearts, I go, no! 6 days, 7 days, brass, heretic! No, I'm sitting back there, and I actually didn't do that. I understand that you could, and so that's where I'm coming from. It's the church I don't go to. Now, why did I leave that church? I say I respect it. In fact, I found great comfort in it. There were times through my teens, through my 20s, that I anguished for a communion. I was a sinner. Actually, I think I'm a fine person. Yes, I'm a sinner, but I'm not. That's not horrible. You know, there's times most of my crimes at night when I wake up, go, oh, I can't believe I did that. It's usually petty things. Anyway. But I regretted not taking communion, not having that wine and that wafer and that saving grace. Why did I leave it? It's hard to say. If I could demonstrate and prove there was no God, we wouldn't, I don't think you're all stupid, we wouldn't be here. I can't do that. Part of it was moving from Albuquerque to Amarillo, Texas. They are geographically quite close, culturally drastically. Amarillo, Texas, and West Texas. Suddenly I went from a fairly cosmopolitan community to one where everyone was a fundamentalist. Everyone believed the word. There were serious discussions at campus about the second coming. In fact, Amarillo, Texas, it's where they built nuclear weapons. That was the major industry at the time. There was someone from New York wondered why. She went there to investigate. They have to build them someplace. Maybe it's just a chance. It's because they didn't worry about nuclear apocalypse because they thought the apocalypse was coming. They said it was chosen for it. And the community leader said she just talked to the nuts. I was reading this and going, no, she talked to the people. So part of it was coming to a place that was full of everyone believing the word of the Bible. I didn't really respect them. But it was more than that. It was, well, probably like many of you, I was really, and I still am, concerned about the nature of truth. Concerned about what's right and wrong. And increasingly, Christianity just didn't hang together for me. It just didn't feel right. God sacrificing a vengeful God to a vengeful God when God set up all the... it just didn't gel. More so, there was probably a link with mathematics. Not a mathematical proof there was no God. That's silly. It's that a concern for methodology, a concern for evaluating arguments. This might be reflected in high school. I did not like high school. People were talking about things I just didn't get. They said this is true, and I didn't see it. I always assumed I must be just stupid. The one place I did not feel that way was with math. Now, in the math world, I think there's two camps. There's the people who go into math because they like rules, and they really listen to authority well. The math department is known, I think, on campus as the department that gets in every staffing report early. Authority told us. The mathematician, is that true? Yeah. There's also a smaller percentage, and probably what I fall into, who liked math because there was an independent way of checking if an argument's correct, if there's a proof. And you didn't have to suck up to authority at all. You didn't have to worry about them liking you, which, trust me, in my high school, they did not. No, I'm not kidding. They really had animosity. You could do it. And so I became very concerned with how to evaluate arguments. What is methodology? And that's at the heart, much more than bridging in liberal arts, which I actually disagree with you. I think the barriers are what makes liberal arts what it is. Every discipline, there are two types of disciplines on this campus. There's those that are subject-driven and those that are methodologically driven. Subject-driven means things like history. What's history? It's the study of history. And their separate independent arguments is what is a correct historical argument. The Department of History argues with themselves as what's allowable, what's not allowable. They argue about the nature of the subject. They don't disagree as trying to figure out something about the past. Math seemingly is about numbers, shapes, and such. No! Math is anything that logical, rigorous proof applies to. It is pure methodology. It's what we design our entire curriculum around, is to develop that sense of proof. Now it happens that most things that matter, how I deal with others, how I deal with my family, how I, the big questions aren't subject to proof. They're too complicated. That's why math ends up studying numbers and shapes. We just don't know. I'd like that mathematical proof, but I can't. But I believe it. I actually do believe that mathematics is the ultimate structure of reality, even though I'm not really sure what those words mean. To be honest, but as a pragmatic sense, they give me meaning. But that's one thing. The other thing in leaving my religion, the fact that it was so comforting at times. Math can be also somewhat that comforting. Mainly on those moments of insight, which some of you have felt, but I suspect many of you have never felt. Otherwise you wouldn't hate math. And this, just by random chance, there's going to be a good 20% of you who don't like it. I suspect more. When you have that moment of insight, it is the most incredible feeling in the world. And it's not just a single moment, it's just that suddenly you see an entire vista of truth. It feels like you're mainlining into the core of reality. Now, the great mystery to me is, first of all, why we enjoy it so much. I can come up with some cheap evolutionary thing that we have. I don't think dogs have that experience, and they've evolved too. But why we have that, why, and this is what's so frustrating, why so often when I have those moments of insight that feel so powerful, that give my life meaning, that they end up, when I try to apply a proof, they end up being wrong. But rarely totally wrong. That's a sense of frustration, and it also means a deep sense of skepticism. So mathematics is a methodology of proof, but the tension is, why do we have those insights, such powerful feelings, that can both be right more often than not, but often going down the wrong road? Now, one of the great joys of teaching for me, and I try to do this in my classes probably ineffectively, is to create those moments for students. Not to say, oh, just do this routine and just apply this formula, blah, blah, blah. But no, to create the moments when you have to face you do not know what's going on. When you have to face and make a leap. And when you make those leaps and suddenly see what's going on, the world, ever so briefly, makes sense. And that's incredible. I don't know why. And that's one of the real mysteries. Why are we capable of thinking about the world, but on the other hand, so poorly? That's the real tension. In February of 1993, when some of you might not have even been alive, I had to give one of the faculty seminars. And actually I was talking about, why do I think mathematics is the ultimate description of reality? And it's right because mathematics regularly discovers miracles. Absolutely amazing facts. And I was thrilled. You know what I talked about? Gauss Bonnet. The very first formula he had there, I said, this formula can't be just chance. Now,
Amen.
That's beauty! You understand it, and that was the whole talk was explaining. But I started that presentation with the following. With a quote from Lou Reed with the Velvet Underground, who said, when Ginny was just 5 years old, there was nothing going on at all. Every time she turned on the radio, she could hear nothing at all, at all. Then one fine morning, she happened to turn on a New York station, and she couldn't believe what she heard. Her body started shaking to that fine, fine music. Her life was saved by rock and roll. Despite all of life's complications, you could just dance to that rock and roll station, and it was all right. Now, at the time, I was making... I made the following guess about Lou Reed, which I later heard was true. I assumed he had a troubled high school years. I imagined he had grown up in Long Island, and that he heard early rock and roll in the mid-50s, and saw that way when certain types of music just fill you up and make you want to dance in a way that's unbelievable, much like when you figure out a mathematical proof, to be honest, which is why math people regularly talk when you get it correct, you do a happy dance. I figured that was the case, and I later heard that was indeed true. In fact, he had a really rough high school years. His parents were worried about his sexual orientation. He was forced to go through electric shock therapy to try to cure him. He had problems. And I said that experience of first learning about rock and roll of the mid-50s is much like many mathematicians, at least for me, for mathematics. Yes, life has meaning. I don't know what it is. But that feeling when I prove something cannot be just artificial. It's got to be important. Of course, there's that tension that sometimes you're wrong. And that usually I spend time in my office 3 floors up with a blank sheet of paper, silently or not so silently, cursing. And so, in that presentation from 1993, I closed it with another quote from Lou Reed of the Velvet Underground, from probably one of the greatest songs, I would say, ever. Harold, an amazing piece of work. And he said, I don't know where I'm going, but I'm going to try for the kingdom if I can, because it makes me feel like I'm a man. When I put that spike into my vein, you know, nothing feels quite the same. When I'm rushing on my run, and I feel like Jesus' son. But I guess I just don't know. But I guess I just don't know. For me, born, raised, Lutheran Missouri Synod, inerrancy of the Bible, the most important thing in the world is your relationship with Jesus Christ, or you will burn in hell forever. Most of you, by the way, will burn in hell forever. It is what I was taught. Sorry, I'm there. See ya. Finding some comfort in mathematics, but recognizing that in some sense, if you are someone whose most important thing in your life is your relationship with Jesus Christ, you're saying, you're comparing that to that? Oh my God, how petty. And there's a fear that that's the case. But at the same time, wanting the comfort of religion, wanting the blessedness of communion, but somehow holding my belief of truth, holding my belief in what's really honest, more important, and willing to deal with that sort of despair. At the same time, almost every day, having some moment of insight into the world, at least for me through math. Which is why I'm an atheist. And it's why the Missouri Synod is the church I don't go to. Thank you very much.
else want to sit here? There we go. So, I don't know if you gentlemen, we haven't rehearsed. You'll be able to tell in about 3 seconds. We have not rehearsed. Oh, time's up. So, I wanted to follow on the notion of insight and how you said it's those moments, those sort of explosions of moments, and you're not even sure, you don't know where it's going, but it's taking it from your point of view, insight leading to your sense of personal faith. How would you respond to that moment that Tom was talking about?
So, I guess in terms of this mathematical proof that you talked about, and in terms of this euphoria, I completely agree. Because I get that same rush, and that's why I'm in this job. But then I think so I guess it's related to my question that I had for you, Tom, which is when you talked about liberal arts education being this barrier breaking rather than sort of integrating. So when I think of this euphoria, when I go to I've been to my wife's public health when she was in public health school at Johns Hopkins. I was listening to the and
sorry, I'm thinking too hard.
But it made me realize when I sat in on some of her classes that I loved what they were thinking about in public health school, right? Like the issues about how to teach people in terms of providing medicine to a society that actually rejects it, that thinks it's Western. And I think there's a puzzle right there, right? And to figure out that puzzle is euphoria. So for me, I don't think mathematics sort of has that, has a trump card on it.
Of course not.
Oh, okay.
I assume everyone has that feeling in their own discipline.
Yeah, okay.
Except math has an independent way of checking it because of mathematical proof. Yeah, that's one of the problems in the world. Someone has a moment of insight and they suddenly start trying to dictate to everybody else. Math has this whole separate way of trying to say, well, I'm probably wrong. I mean, when you write a proof, you have to, after you write it down, you become your own worst enemy. You say, where am I being stupid?
That's right.
And we're trained to find where we're being stupid, which is why we're not happy campers.
But despite
all evidence to the contrary.
For example, if somebody had a great idea about what kind of app to write, for the iPad or something like that, wouldn't sort of the world be that kind of?
Of course.
Okay.
And I assume people have it all the time. I mean, it's not true. When those moments of insight, those moments when the world feels right, do they just occur for math? I mean, no, of course not.
Cool, good.
No, it happened to me once. So how do you know what you know? You both come at it, you both have this
I don't think anyone is trying to prove it. So that's one thing I liked about it. I loved last year's Veritas Forum. But something mentioned to me that both sides, basically, there was no new arguments. And I agreed. When I heard Professor Adams, I was going, yeah, he's right, I agree with that. The other guy's wrong. But there was nothing new there, so that's why we didn't want to make it an argument.
Yeah.
No, I want you to argue.
Well,
so how do you know what you know? You come at.
You're going to agree a lot tonight, but that's all right. But I can't disagree with Tom because of the fact that I was raised in South India. My mom was a Christian, right? So that certainly has wired me into thinking a certain way. So I'm not looking at this in an abstract setting and saying, because of these empirical facts, I just know it to be true. But a couple of things that make me believe in the Christian faith, for example, is the more I think about this historicity of Christ, right? Sort of what happened to that thing. So
but then why not Muhammad? I mean, there are certain of the world religions that are historical based.
Absolutely
the
true.
three Western ones.
Absolutely true. So the Christian faith, I think, to me, is completely dependent on one event in life, right? Which is the resurrection of God. Mm-hmm. If Jesus didn't resurrect, it's junk, right?
So the people who I would agree that the higher biblical criticism think that's just a symbol. I agree, those people are dead wrong.
Absolutely.
And Missouri Synod people hate those people.
Yeah. But if it is true, then it means something.
Oh, it means a lot.
Right.
So I'm with you.
Yeah. So
it is true.
Yeah. So the question is, Muhammad never made such a claim. Like, he claimed to be a prophet. But Jesus claimed to be God. He claimed to be God not only just to be God, but a God who will set the world right. And the evidence that he's going to set the world right is that he himself is resurrected. So he's going to say the world is going to be made good again, and it's going to start by me doing it as an evidence that my body is going to come back and become right again, right? So to me that is a big claim, and if I can buy that, that's a huge thing. If I can, so the more I looked into that claim, so to answer your question, Steve, right? Like what is it that made me think about it more? Is that particular claim? Like that to me is is good, and because of that, I think of other things. So if somebody comes up to me and says, you know what, that I don't think it's going to work because of these reasons, then I need to think about those reasons and reevaluate things. Absolutely.
So either of you remember a moment, something when you came to your faith, Tom, when you tipped from Missouri Synod person to atheist? Was there a moment? You talked about
No,
was there a flash?
there's a lot of moments at age 14 through probably 19. I went through the standard thing of saying, well, I'm not going to trust the Bible as the literal word of God. There's no proof of that. But I still believed in a God, because I kind of bought in the prime mover argument. You know, there had to be some initial cause. And then I said, well, if there's initial cause, for some reason I thought the initial cause had to be a personal God. I don't know why, I was 15. And I said, well, if there's a personal God, He'd want us to know and love Him. Again, that was coming from Missouri Synod. Why a prime cause would have one care anything about me at all? I don't know. That's what I believe. And so there was the evolution of, well, then I believe that, and then I would look at historically. Well, what's the most historic? And I said, so I was a Christian for a while without believing in the Bible. That's kind of weird. Then I moved into the standard, into the agnostic world. I just don't know. And I eventually realized and going, well, atheist doesn't mean you have absolute certainty. Of course not. I could be wrong. But I lead my life as if there is no God. If that makes sense.
Almost. Almost there. I know where you.
So I don't think there was a day or a time or an event, you know, that I sort of fell on my knees and said, you know, into your life I commit, or anything like this.
Because I can remember that for me.
Oh, really? Well, that's fascinating.
I can remember feeling the presence of God. In my church, there was the original church. They built a new one right next to it, and the old one was still there, and that's we held Sunday school. For some reason, I was dropped off earlier. Probably my parents didn't want me around. And I was by myself in this church. I must have been 10, 11, maybe 12. And it was this empty, large church with the crucifix on the beginning. This is probably a false memory. And I remember sitting there by myself in this large room. And I felt the presence of God.
So can
It was
I
moving.
go and
Sure.
time out? So there wasn't a time when I would say that I made a commitment and that was it, right? But I would say that throughout my life I have felt that presence of God, right?
Okay.
So my argument partly is that, you know, the supernatural and natural, if there is something called the supernatural, either it sort of doesn't intersect with this world at all, right? Or it does. And if it does, then the natural must be able to feel it somehow, right? So I do think that I felt those moments, right, in terms of
Sure.
the reality of God, right? And to me, the most clear way of saying that is prayer. Like in terms of, you know, there's a saying that, you know, when I pray, lots of coincidences happen. You know, like things that you would think, like, how in the world is that possible? It just happens every time I pray. So you might think it's random chance, but the random chance happens to work out to be my favor a lot.
Have you taken a course in probability?
I have.
So Tom, that's really interesting to me, that sense where you actually, at that age, sensed the presence of God. Well, how did you explain that away later?
No, I have all kinds of senses and insights that you think they're wrong.
No.
But it is the case. I mean, I don't know. So I'm in West Texas. So as an undergraduate at the University of Texas, it was clear that the campus intellectuals had all experienced fundamentalism. We saw in our high schools people's lives changed. We saw, I can remember Bible meetings, people going up being saved. And that was the big change when I moved to the Northeast, especially for grad school at Brown. Suddenly it seemed that they thought the fundamentalists were just a bunch of ignorant yokels. And I remember the Southerners, which by then I realized I sort of was, said, no, you're missing the point. You know, I can't deny I saw people's lives change. I saw people who were going to really messed up, and suddenly they were decent human beings. I give pop psychology arguments for it? Sure, and in fact I do. But if I had that sort of experience, well, I believe I'd be more likely to believe.
So just a question about one of the things that I was thinking about was about faith and politics, you know, religion and politics. How do you think they fit together? Or do you think they shouldn't? Or, you know,
Well, Missouri Synod actually
yes.
keeps them quite separate. Which I like.
I mean, like, how is it possible that, I mean, aren't your political views impacted by your spiritual views, whether lack of or form?
Well, they have to be.
Exactly, right? So,
Yeah, I agree with that
but when you say that you keep them separate, then what does that mean? That's
in the sense of, when I was in high school, it was the mid-'70s, and that was just at the time where certain of the fundamentalists were starting to serve a lot of political thing. By now, we have the Republican Party. Those people have to kowtow to Christians. You had the last presidential debates among the Republicans. They all had to swear that Jesus Christ was the most important thing in the world. I would say, I was pretty sure in the Bible it says, give to Caesar what's Caesar, what's God is God. I would think God is powerful enough to even have an atheist be a good president. I don't see why you have to be religious, even if I was Lutheran Missouri Synod. It's independent. And in fact, most of morality, most of the big questions, we're not all disagreeing. Stealing, bad. Murder, not good. Those aren't controversial.
Okay, that's fair.
Does that make sense?
It does.
And that's what I mean.
Yeah,
That's what I mean.
fair.
And it seems like now that you have to almost wear it on your sleeves.
So yeah, I think when you're thinking about politics, you actually meant like our political system today in the West, rather
Right.
than the way we would address the
While
problems
people
of-
say that ethics should be separate from politics, this is absurd.
Right.
All
Cool.
laws are
Perfect.
ethical.
Perfect.
It's just that most of the ethics we don't disagree with.
Right.
You know? Seriously, yeah.
Well, since we're at the point of intense agreement. So, do you have anything else before we hit up the
Well, there
audience?
is one thing that might be a God, in that in the advertisement they said 2 super cool math professors. Well, I agree with that with Professor Davidos. I think for me to be super cool is talking about a real leap of faith.
No, I think the Lou Reed stuff did it.
I know you know who Lou Reed is.
One of my favorites. So, we'll open up the floor for some questions. And please make sure they're questions, not 15 minutes that sort of ends with an inflection. Oh, come on. Oh, there's one. Yes?
So Jerry said you live as if, like there's no God, right?
Right.
So how would your life change if you believe that there's a God, except, say, going to church and participating in, like, church community events?
I would say probably in terms of my day-to-day actions, not that different. Most of us lead normal lives. You're from Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, your actions don't affect anything. It's all a matter of faith. So probably internally, I'd be quite different. But in terms of my day-to-day actions, I think I'd probably do much the same. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the great real mysteries, is that most of us all kind of agree on ethics. I mean, there's big issues that we disagree on, but in day-to-day life, we all know you don't spit at people.
But, I mean,
Wait a minute, I don't know that rule.
I'm an administrator.
Don't play this.
you did say that the question about like I haven't done anything bad. Like I go to sleep, right, and I don't check off the list of like, wow, I haven't killed anything. So
No, it's not that. I meant more. I mean, don't you have times when you wake up, I can't believe I did that.
absolutely.
And suddenly I'm remembering, I did that when I was 15, I was rude to somebody. Let it go.
I mean, to me, let's talk about about letting it go just for a second, because one thing I struggle with, and I'm just curious about your answer to this question, and I think as a Christian, I usually think Christians are usually the worst, most immoral people there are. I mean, this is sort of my belief in the sense that that we actually need somebody to save our butts, right? Like, there's nothing I can do by myself. And so my question is, for example, if somebody really hurts my mother, right?
Rip their heart out.
Exactly. So you have a movie like The Godfather, right? Or you have the absolute retaliation, Sonny the Causeway, right? And the question is, how do you stop sort of that cycle? For me, the only reason that makes me not want to retaliate, right, is to say that if I get out of the way, God will take care of that person. In other words, I'm actually making way for justice to happen, and the cycle of me hitting an eye for an eye will end. So for you, for me, the sense of justice is like somebody else is going to handle it. Like, what are your thoughts about that? Or?
I don't think there's a God in hell. I hope society does.
Okay. Okay. So it's your faith in like political system.
More or less. That's also why you wouldn't put me on the jury if someone hurt my daughter. I would rip their heart out. Unless the only one who can do that is me.
Yeah.
I saw a hand up over here.
I'll introduce myself. I'm not a member of Williams community, but I heard Dr. Davila speaking for a brief millisecond about Pythagoras, so I wanted to pick both of your brains about Pythagorean and grasping for the celestial in the theorems of all the slapping Pythagoras and all that.
Pythagoras,
So you're all about it.
he's correct all the way. When he believed that everything was mathematics, I believe that too. Mathematics is the ultimate structural reality. I believe that the nervousness I'm feeling right now is some mathematical theorem. What it is, I do not know what it is. But I believe it as a matter of almost faith. Can I prove it? No. So I like Pythagoras.
One pro Pythagoras.
He's all right. I guess I'm just to sort of use that to piggyback to talk about what Tom just said about the structural reality, right? So that's a fair way of saying what you said, right, from that viewpoint. But I guess to me this is sort of where the natural and the supernatural come in, right? So I'm trying to actually sort of live and trying to figure out where the line would be between mathematical intuition and mathematical, before you kind of get it, the eureka moment, versus sort of an interaction with the spiritual, right? So now, when I'm doing math and I'm trying to find out about moduli spaces or whatever, I think it's natural, right? But I think at the same time we're also spiritual beings. So you have to kind of blur that line. But on the other hand, to say that everything is mathematical, right? I mean that exactly. So, all right. So,
But it's also when you talk about the word spiritual, I don't know what that means. Do I think there's mystery in the world? Oh my goodness. If you call that spiritual, I'm willing to go with it.
I think that
Is there the feeling of the sublime?
yeah.
When you listen to certain pieces of music, when certain movies. Yes. Is there a feeling that the world is special, those times with family laughing at the dining room table uncontrollably? Yes. Those are wonderful times. Can I explain them in a cold, harsh, mechanistic way, in terms of little billiard balls firing around? No. It's a mystery. You call it spiritual? Sure.
You also said one thing, sort of at the end of your talk, Tom, where you were talking about, you just mentioned really quickly, sort of depressing. You used that word, a little depressing. But I just kind of want to tease that out. I was just wondering, like, the Christian faith, whether artificially invoked just to keep our sanity going in our lives, right? Has this kind of a good news punchline, right? No matter how much crap happens, things will get better. And it's not because we're finding out better ways of making things better. Or, for example, maybe there'll be a theorem, a formula that'll say how the mind works. Right? That would be wonderful, right? And I truly agree that that would be great. But that to me doesn't mean the world's going to get better. That just means we just know more about it. Right? So my question is, like, to me, although we might know more about the world, I actually have this kind of a hope, right? The Christian hope that, again, grounded in this historical resurrection, that the world is going to get better. Now, do you have, like, what kind of good news do you see?
You mean that? In some sense, I think the world is better. I think it's standard in popular media. I think we're living in the worst of times. We are living in the greatest times ever. People are living to be 80 or 90. There's even at the superficial level, the few people you've heard me talk about, let's say the Miracle Stop and Shop. If after this I'm hungry for Doritos, which I probably will be, I can get into my car and go to Stop and Shop, and there are Doritos.
God is good.
I don't have to pre-order. They're there. I mean, it just, life expectancy is long. The lives we lead are so good compared to 1,000 years ago. Now, are there places in the world where there's drastic poverty? Yes, and that's a problem, and that's depressing.
So you really think the world is getting better?
Yes.
I mean, but if you look at the 20th century, I agree with you, right? We have amazing, I don't have an iPhone.
In the 20th century, even though we had the bloodiest wars ever, life expectancy soared, counting all those
But
deaths.
then you have things like the Holocaust. You have things like the slaughter.
Horrible. You look at this, and well, I was kidding. I was going to show you. Say, do you think there's a God? Explain the Holocaust.
Yeah.
That is true.
Yeah.
That's horrible, and I can't explain it. But I think day-to-day life is getting better in a slow, incremental way. The Enlightenment works.
I actually agree with you that the life is getting better, but I don't think it's because of the Enlightenment.
Now, is there kind of punchline?
No, that's I don't know. Oh, you mean punchline for what?
I mean, the good news. I don't have good news.
Oh, I see. There is no better for you. I see.
Better. Relative news. Yes.
I'm just curious, coming from to take an all or nothing approach and believing in the equality of all religions if they strive for the good, or rejecting all religions?
Sort of to both of us?
Sure.
So I can start.
Go for it.
So I think the Christian viewpoint would say that, I mean, at the end of the day, Tom and I would agree that there is truth. Right? Like in other words, like
Yes.
Gauss Bonnet is true. Right?
It's
There
true.
is truth in this
Money in the
world,
bank.
right? Which means that there's also things that are not true, like a lot of my students' exams. As a mathematician, can't look at those things and say, you know what, they tried really well. Now, I can probably give them, you know, like, oh, they showed up for office hours, they're faithful, you know, there's something to take into consideration, but at the end of the day, you know, hey, they got a B, they didn't get an A because of that thing. So I have to evaluate truth in terms of absolutes. So to me, how do all religions work? Well, everybody's claiming something to be true. Well, either they're all junk, or there might be truth in actually one of them. Right? And Tom would say, you know what, they're all thinking about different things, but really it's just a solution to, you know, some kind of thing in your head. For me, I think there's actually an answer to one. Now, that's different than how one should speak to, approach, hang out with, befriend somebody of another religion, right? There's a difference between thinking this is true versus actually mocking, insulting, or not considering them as human. Because one of the goals of the Christian faith is to say you were actually a fool of fools. The Lord of the universe actually picked you not because you're great, but because you suck. And so we have to have that badge of suckiness. Right? So I wasn't chosen because I was fantastic. I was chosen sort of for the other reason. So the way I would interact with a Buddhist, a Hinduist, an atheist would be, hey man, we're all junk. I mean, like, we didn't do anything great. In fact, Tom's probably better to me, or a Buddhist might be better to me than what I'm doing, because to me, there's nothing I can do to strive to make things better unless God empowers me to do it. And you know, it's because of His work. But a Buddhist or a Hindu might say, you know, it's because of what we have to do. And, you know, an Islamist might say it, or a Muslim might say different things. So I'm not one to judge and to say, you know, one is less or worse than the other one as a person. But that doesn't mean I cannot say that there isn't truth in a religion or not.
Shockingly enough, we almost agree. I think there's two ways that you're talking about equality. You're talking about equality of beliefs. I don't believe that. I think there's the law of the excluded middle. There's truth statements and false statements. I might not know what they are, but I believe that they're all can't be right. If you talk at the individual level, I phenomenally believe in the equality of people. I think none of us have a privileged point of view. I'm overall fairly big follower of Karl Popper, who follow that closely. That we all have our beliefs. Some of our beliefs are falsifiable. None of our beliefs can be proven to be absolutely true. And thus, that's why, you know, we're all just ignorant people moving in the darkness, trying our best. It explains actually how academic politics works. We're trying our best, we're making mistakes all the time. Does that kind of make sense? So the quality of that individual equality, I really buy that. That anyone here has equal access to being wrong. But that doesn't mean all beliefs are good. In fact, probably almost all of our beliefs are wrong. You know, it's not. I can't believe that both Safi and I are both right. We are probably both wrong.
That was depressing.
I understand. Professor Garrett, you mentioned that during your school days, you encountered people who had experienced a change in the way they live, I mean a change in their lifestyle.
Yeah.
I want to ask, what explanation did you give to the changes you saw in their lives?
I'm really not sure. I'm actually thinking of this one woman, or girl, at the time, who was a bit wild, and she stopped being wild. I could make a cheap joke to much my disappointment, but I was in math, and really, there was no chance anyway. And I saw her life change when she found Jesus. I assume there's people in all religious traditions who get changed somehow, and they make a change. I identify, sometimes she must have been having personal problems, sometimes psychologically changed. I can't explain it. I just saw it happen. I could recognize there was a reality to it. So I'm not really answering your questions. I don't know. But it meant when I go, let's say, into a more secular community, I had tremendous respect for that. You know, these people have had an experience that I don't think I had. Maybe if I had that experience, I'd agree with them. It would change my experience.
Pete Daniels here. Professor Garrity, I want to go back to that experience in the church where you don't go to anymore, and talk about the experience that you had with God.
Right.
And I'm wondering how God interacted with you at that time, or how you sensed.
I heard no voices.
You heard no voices, but did you sense anything, or
Yeah,
how did
I
you
felt-
know? How did you know it was God? Was it a comforting?
Certainly it was comforting, and I felt the reality of God. At least that's what I interpreted. I think there's just you can feel this in certain types of. I now think it's just somehow part of the way our psychologies are, and that you're in a big empty room, and there's a quiet, and you're raised in a tradition to believe the most important thing is Jesus Christ, and there's a cross up there, that you might feel something. At a 10-year-old, I interpreted it as God. By 15 or 16, I said, oh, once again, I was mildly deluded that morning. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so I had lots of insights, many of them wrong.
You both kind of took opposite positions on the purpose of the liberal arts education earlier. I was just hoping you could both say a little more.
That's a great point, Tom. So that, seriously, that really shook me up because I never was expecting you to say that. So my question is, how is that different from like a research school? I think,
Tremendous difference. And that first of all, respect. I think that students should, okay, let's say you want to solve a problem in your life. Would it be great if you could apply the methodology of mathematics to do it? Yeah. Are you going to? No. So you have to use other means. If an historian held their standards of truth, mathematical proof, there would never be another historical argument. And that different disciplines have to accept different types of arguments. And that young people and even old people have to get comfortable doing that. To realize, here I'm making an argument that I'm not mathematical, but it feels right for these reasons. Or here is a standard accepted way to make an argument. It might be wrong, but it's at least accepted by other people. That's a good thing for people to know. And at a research school where you become like an accounting major, you don't get that. Here you have to take some history, you have to take some English, you have to take some math, you have to take some that. That's good.
to me,
different ways of looking at the world.
I guess to me, what sort of to go with that, to me, it almost seems like we're all thinking of the same thing. I mean, maybe mathematics gives you a tool to write it explicitly, but maybe the problems in science, maybe in biology, is really a math problem, right? They just haven't phrased it right. Or maybe no. And this is the greatest discoveries right now, right? For the past, 300, 400 years have been math and physics, right? They've been invested and hang out.
Right.
But now math and biology are starting to start that game. So I think the idea is there's so many questions and ideas in biology that really are math questions, and vice versa, right? A lot of the answers we have, they can just basically be. So I think to me, when I talk about the blending of these worlds, I think at the end of the day, I don't think math has an edge on it. I know what you're talking about in terms of this purity of proving, right, what you have. But I think we're all thinking about the same kind of ideas. There's this beauty in English and literature, and the reason I love it is because I see math in it, right? I see that, that formation behind the scenes, and I want my students to be able to blend those worlds.
So in that case, I agree. If you're at a research university, I think that Williams isn't, but should be a place where people are talking a lot more.
Like, absolutely.
Right? Because
Absolutely.
lunches is one small step to trying to do that.
Yes.
So, I mean, as one thing is I know that faculty complain about students is that you all are too overcommitted with so many extracurricular activities. That you're all not hanging out in the dorms just schmoozing. That you're not arguing music, religion, whatever. Kant, whatever. Which is something that I remember a lot of college doing, eating dry Captain Crunch. Passing it around the dorm room. That's good.
You have to know this about Tom, that he did actually argue about Kant and those things when he was in college. And I got really good at Super Mario Brothers when I was in college.
We had
And also I think that some of one of the problems with faculty is that we don't talk to each other enough either. And I would support that heavily. We're full of smart people. So one is the dream, and there's a lot of rhetoric at Williams that we're the best. That's just rhetoric, of course, and that's PR. We are a fine school. We're a good school. We are not legendary. No one's going to write history books about Williams College. They should. And they're going to do that if we talk to each other more and have great ideas coming from this place. If the faculty start talking to each other and have wild ideas. If students, ideally when you're here, but more likely when you've learned what here, you go off and do great things in your 20s or 30s, and you'll go, oh, there was the Williams Mafia and music, the Williams Mafia and political theory, the Williams Mafia, that would be wonderful. And that's kind of the spirit of the liberal arts. So in that sense, we, again, agree.
There you go. I'm looking for one more question, then I'm going to ask my big one. Yes?
My name is Marguerite. I'm a freshman, and this question is for Professor Garrity. And so I know your experience in the church basically seems to have caused you to become an atheist. I wanted to know if you feel that it's justified for atheists who haven't ever experienced going to church, or if they're justified in their views if they haven't set foot in the door of a church or temple or something.
Well, since I don't believe there's a God, yeah, I mean, they're certainly justified. And in fact, it saves them a lot of time. And I do know there are people who are atheists who don't, there's no sense of loss in them. Well, I raised my children. It's not like I told them there's no God. If you go to church, I'll punish you. No. But they were raised in a secular home. I don't think they suffer that way. And I remember friends in college, one in particular, a very close friend, who she was raised in a secular home, and she had no concept of these issues. It didn't bother me at all. Again, because I believe there is no God. And so, okay.
Can I ask you a side question about freedom?
Sure.
So, on a related note, where would you draw the line for certain freedoms? In other words, what is good and what is bad? When you're saying, in terms of absolute truths, right? You would say, yes, there are absolute truths.
Yeah,
in terms of, so, are there things like that, or is it very society-oriented? Certain societies could define, it's okay to have, for example, extreme cases of child pornography. You might say, maybe you're in a society that just says that's okay, that line can be...
I would also know that's bad.
Okay, right, but certainly in this society it's true, right? So, are there lines of freedom? For me, I would say, from historical context for what God said, there are certain absolutes. 10 Commandments, love your neighbor, show kindness, these absolutes. And I think the reason we all sort of agree with those absolutes is because I think we're all children of God, right? We're all God's kids, we're His creations. So, but on the other hand, you don't think that. So do you think, is it evolutionary that certain freedoms come? I mean, certain societies have very different viewpoints as to what's right and wrong.
I don't know. Okay. And I wonder about this all the time.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
As what is a correct, what is a right action now?
Yeah.
First of all, talking about the 10 Commandments, it is common in our society to say everything's found in the 10 Commandments. That's just fake, and that's false. The first commandment is, thou shalt know the God before me. I don't buy that. Remember the Sabbath day, keep it holy. I'm glad stores are open on the Sabbath. Don't covet things. I think our society is based on coveting. Any of you are going to, well, it is. Yeah, so in some sense, I don't buy that at all.
I like your shirt.
That's not here. That was inappropriate.
Okay, so we crossed the line. Too much freedom.
But as to what is the right way of running a society, that's much harder.
Yes.
Is it evolution? I don't know. Okay. Is it for me personally to try to create those moments of insight? That seems to be important.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to try to do one final. There have been so many awkward moments of agreement up here that I really, because there has been so much agreement, because you do come...
Okay, he's wrong!
I agree. So what would it take for each of you to change your position?
This was actually asked last year at the Veritas.
Oh,
and
great.
because I now can channel Colin Adams, a far smarter man than me. And there's all kinds of ways. Let's say I'm going home tonight, and a car hits me and I lose my arm. And I pray and my arm grows back. How do I start believing? It sounds absurd, but we know that's not going to happen. Or let's say some of the skeptics say that if God has an influence in the world, you should be able to empirically check it. So if it was the case, this person, I remember the example was going, if you could have various religious groups pray for something to happen, and suddenly it seemed like Catholics' prayers work better, well, maybe I'll become Catholic. That if there's some kind of empirical evidence, I would start actually wondering. I've seen no evidence about that whatsoever. So I could imagine that. Or if I'm walking home and, there's a burning bush and God speaks to me. My first instinct is going, bad liquor. But it happens more than once. But I don't know what something would say. I don't know what would make him change his mind.
I guess to me, to kind of follow up on your thing, have you thought about, I'll tell you exactly what it is for me, right? Which is why I'm asking this question. Have you thought about the resurrection? In other words, have you looked into that event?
Mm-hmm.
To me, that's what it is.
Right, isn't there was at that time there was all kinds of stuff going on at 30 or 33, 8, there was other stories about people coming from the dead. That's not an unusual thing.
Absolutely.
And I can imagine at that time, it's the one that happened to win out because it had the slightly best story. It was kind of like a meme sort of thing.
So let me. Let me say one thing about it, and then I'll tell you that. So for me, the reason the resurrection was convicting was because, true, a lot of people have resurrected or come back, or there are stories about these things, right? And there have been a lot of people who've been claimed to be messiahs, who say, I am the chosen one that God is moving.
Right.
And but it's true that the moment a messiah is, what happens when that messiah goes up against Rome is one thing always happens: they die. They always get crucified. They always get slaughtered by Rome. And everybody knows that dead Messiah is no longer Messiah. You move on to the next guy in the line, right? Then XYZ is now Messiah, right? So, but it's amazing that this, to me, the reason the resurrection stood out, and this is what C.S. Lewis partly argues, is that somehow all of these factors are sitting together, right? And to me, to be convinced, to answer your question, Steve, is I would immediately give up this Christian faith, right? To me, it's actually junk if that thing didn't happen.
So if they came across some kind of tablet in Jerusalem,
Absolutely.
And it was these 12 guys saying at a drinking club, let's make up this story.
Yeah, right. Or I mean, like...
You would actually believe it was kind of the story.
I mean, something historical, where historians would say, you know what, that thing, and here's the reasons why. And the more historians actually look at, one of my favorites is Colin Entiway. And he has argued that, he's a New Testament scholar at this time, right? So he's kind of pushing this thing, and he's saying, from the Jewish perspective, they're the most monotheistic out of any religion there is at that time period. The most monotheistic religion there is. They would never in their world, no Jew would ever say, there is a God in different persons, right? There is a God as a man. That's just a disgusting thought. Now the Roman culture completely would say this, right? At this time they had numerous gods all the time. So, and yet within this sect, this sort of Jewish group, they form this concept that there is this person who's actually God. And the only way they would say that is, to me, is that this resurrection actually happened. That Jesus was kind of pointing the whole time, I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it. And I did it. And the reason it's happening is because you see this in the time of Moses, the blood spilled on the land, and all these kind of points towards that thing. So if somebody can convince me or show me, something, I'd throw it away.
Well, it's been an absolute honor for me to be up here with you guys. Thank you so much. I think I'm proud.
For more information about the Veritas Forum, including additional recordings and a calendar of upcoming events, please visit our website at veritas.org.